This 25-year-old Nissan Skyline R34 just arrived from Japan. And before we take it on the road, there's one critical job we have to do first. Every imported car like this hides a big question. When was the timing belt last changed? On an interference engine like this one, a failed belt means bent valves, possible damaged pistons, either way, a very bad day. Today we're replacing the timing belt, the front oil seals, and the drive belts, the kind of preventive work that protects your investment and keeps a JDM legend alive. I'll walk you through the full process, share a few tips I've learned after decades of doing these, and explain why this is one of the most important services that you can perform on any car, especially an imported performance car. Let's get right into it. Before we get started on this job, let's talk about the importance of a timing belt and what it does. The purpose of a timing belt is to keep the relationship between the top half of the engine and the bottom half of the engine in sync. So in other words, there's a very specific relationship between the camshafts and the crankshaft at the bottom of the engine. The camshafts are turning at the top. They're opening and closing the valves at a very specific time in relationship to the bottom half of the engine. The bottom half of the engine is connected by connecting rods to the pistons. Those pistons are moving up and down, and then the valves are opening and closing on top of the pistons on this particular engine. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to have those pistons moving up and contacting the open valves, and there's not enough clearance for that. And that's what makes this an interference engine. Not all engines are interference engines. Some of them have plenty of clearance. The piston could be all the way at the very top, what we call top dead center. The valves could be all the way open, and they'll never make contact with each other. And that's what we call a non-interference engine. There's lots of engines that are like that. If you break a timing belt on those kinds of cars, the worst that happens is the car stops running. You'll have it towed into the shop, we'll take it apart, put a new belt on it, put it back together, everything will be working fine again. When you have a car like this that has an interference engine, that just means there's no clearance between open valves and a piston all the way at top dead center. So at some point, if the relationship is lost between those parts, the piston will contact the valves, it'll bend the valves, it could break a valve head off, could crack a piston, it could do some damage to the rings, all those things are possibilities. Either way, you're almost guaranteed to bend some valves on there. We're looking at pulling the engine apart, doing a full complete valve job on it, and hopefully that's all the damage that we find while we've got it apart. So it's really important if you've got a vehicle that has an interference engine that you're taking care of this service at the recommended time and intervals on here. Now there's a lot of different intervals out there for different style belts. You know, there's HSN belts which go longer. They could go 105, 110,000 miles. And then you've got the original style belts that are probably on this car, usually call for somewhere around 60,000 miles. So 5 years, 60,000 used to be the old standard on an older car like this. Those intervals have crept up over the years with different technologies and different materials. So just keep an eye on your vehicle. If you have a timing belt on it, there is a specific interval for it, and you should probably be taking care of it on or before that interval to make sure you don't have this kind of problem. Okay, so before we get into this any further, let's talk about what we have on the floor here. We've got some parts for this thing. And I want to preface this section here by telling you parts are not easy to get for these cars. If you're driving a JDM car, something that's been imported from Japan and does not exist in the US in its current format, it can be very tricky to get parts for, especially an older vehicle. This vehicle's over 25 years old, and these things are not easy to source parts for. Now, we're lucky we've been working with Roger. This is Roger's car from QVO Tactical. If you didn't see our earlier video where we did the inspection on this car after he brought it in from Japan and identified some of the services that need to be done. If you didn't see that, you can check out Roger in that video. He runs QVO Tactical. He builds custom-built holsters. If you guys are into that kind of stuff, if you like pistols and things, you might want to check out his website, QVO Tactical. He's got all kinds of awesome custom holsters for your guns. You can take a peek at his YouTube channel and his content all over social media. This particular vehicle, Roger was able to source all these parts from us. We gave him a resource from some people that we know that were able to get a website that has availability to all the parts that he needed through Japan. Special ordered them, had them shipped to the US. Now we've got some components here that we want to put on. We've basically just got a timing belt, a few front oil seals for the engine. We've got a little bit of a leak in there, so we're going to put new camshaft seals and a crankshaft oil seal at the front of the engine. We'll be putting on a new tensioner and spring, tensioner pulley and the spring for it. And we've also got here some belts for it, so we'll go ahead and replace the drive belts while we've got it apart. I've got this car set up on the lift so we can put it up in the air. We're going to need to go underneath. I want to drain the cooling system on here. I'm going to remove the radiator. Now, it's not necessarily something you have to do, but certainly for convenience, it makes it a lot easier. We don't have to worry about doing any damage to the radiator. Like I said, this car is very hard to get parts for, so we don't want to break anything. We don't want to have it put a hole in the radiator and we're waiting weeks to get it. So we're just going to go ahead and remove the radiator. It's going to make it easier for you to see what's going on in here. It's going to make it easier for me to work on it. And it's also going to protect that radiator and make sure we're not getting any damage to it while we're working around that area. So let's get it up in the air and get it cool and drained out of here. All right, so I'm under here. I'm just going to remove, there's a Phillips head petcock underneath this radiator. We'll have to take that out. And then I've got my forma funnel here. I'm going to try to get this into here without making a mess. This vehicle has got a little bit of a body kit on it. And without taking the body kit off, I'm hoping I can get this coolant at least drained into this bucket without making too much of a mess. It's probably going to come out pretty fast here. There it goes. Well, so much from not making too much of a mess, I guess. Taking a shower over here. While I'm under here, I'm going to remove the belt for the air conditioning compressor. It's easier to reach from underneath here. I'm also removing the lower portion of the fan shroud. This will allow me to take out the fan shroud without hitting the fan. While this coolant's draining, I'm going to go ahead and take the lower hose off the radiator from underneath. You want to be extra careful on these, especially with an older radiator. You want to really make sure you either use a hose hook, some lubricant like WD-40, or just be extra careful in twisting. Either way, you don't want to break the neck off the radiator. I'll be using a hose hook like this one. I'm just going to work it around the top and the bottom. See if I can break that free a little bit. And then we'll just pull it off. All right, from up top here, I want to remove the engine cover. I'm going to remove the intake duct here. Get some access to the front of this engine. Take this nice cover off. Let's remove this ductwork here for the air intake. All right, now we've already got a little bit better look at the engine here, what we need to get to at the front. Let's get this upper radiator hose off. Again, you want to be careful on these radiator here. They can be a little bit tight. When they get old, they get a little bit brittle. Just gently work it off. If you needed to put a little hose hook in there, work it around, or some WD-40, usually works great. So sometimes it'll just take a little bit of WD-40. If you get your hose hook in underneath here a little bit and just put the hose in there, just give a little bit of a spray, and then you can kind of work this around. Distribute that WD-40 a little around the plastic under the hose, and it should come off quite a bit easier once you've done that. Now it just slides right off. Do the same thing here on the other side. I'm going to give it a little bit of a spray here. And still haven't broken it free yet, just got to get it all the way around. There we go. All right, next I want to take out these bolts for the fan shroud. There's two on there. Now I've got my fan shroud bolts out. I'm just going to loosen up the fan before I take this alternator belt off. It's going to allow me to get these bolts loose pretty easily without the pulley spinning. So I'm just going to crack all four of these loose. Now with those loose, I can get the alternator bolts loose and we can take the belt off the alternator. Then we should be able to get the rest of these bolts off the fan clutch pulley. And then with the tension off of that, should be able to pull on this belt a little and get it to move. And then slip the belt off the alternator and the fan clutch water pump pulley. And then I'd like to get this pulley off and out of the way. there are 4 nuts that hold the fan clutch to the water pump. Now, if you waited to loosen these until you took the belt off, you'd have trouble getting these small nuts loose without something to hold the pulley in place. It also makes it easier to access all of these nuts now with no belt on it, because I can rotate it around to a spot that's easier to work on. You gently want to give a little wiggle here until that fan is loose. And I'm going to try to pull this fan out with this shroud now, if I have room. Let me see if I can remove these 2 nuts here on the radiator, push it forward a little bit to give me a little bit of clearance here on the shroud. Otherwise, I'll have to discharge the air conditioning refrigerant. Just get this out of the way. There's your fan clutch. All right. It looks like we had some room to get this radiator out. Just had to move it a little here to the driver's side, which is on the right side, I should remind you. And we got some debris in here. I want to clean this out while we've got this apart. This way this car doesn't have any overheating issues. You can see there's a lot of debris and things stuck in this radiator. Again, these cars are a little bit difficult to get parts for depending on what they are. So we're trying to salvage this the best we can to make it work properly. Looks like it's in good shape, minus the debris that's in there from 25 years of buildup. We also want to make sure we have the rubber mounts that sit in the bottom of the radiator support. We don't want to lose those. So now I've got a lot better access to the front of this engine. You can see how much room I've got down here with the radiator removed. So we can get in and around all these parts, and that way you can see a little bit of what's going on as well, instead of me just feeling my way through stuff here. You can see we've got access to everything on the front there. So we're going to go ahead and remove all the belts on here, and then that'll give us access to the timing cover where the timing belt is underneath. We've got to take this power steering belt off. Now, in order to remove this power steering belt, there are 4 windows in the power steering pulley. We've got to align one of those windows with the pivot bolt on the power steering pump. So I'm going to rotate the engine around a little bit so we get that lined up. And then this way we can get a socket through the window on there. I'll be using my cool little Vim tool that I got from my Cornwell dealer. These are really nice flex head style ratchet heads that you can use with any 3/8 drive square extension. So any length you want it to be, you've got whatever you're limited to only by what you own for extensions in 3/8 drive. And then this has a deep side on it and a shallow side, which is nice. So anytime you're dealing with something like this, a pulley that has a stud with a nut on it, this is great because this will pass all the way through without being too shallow. Sometimes you put a deep socket on there and it's just not deep enough, kind of like this one. Let me see if I can get a close up. Okay, hopefully you can see here. That's the really long stud that I need to loosen the nut on in order to take the tension off the power steering belt. And a regular socket won't fit on there, not even a deep socket. So either a ratcheting wrench or a regular open-end wrench will work, or a pass-through ratchet if you have one of those. And I've got a big breaker bar here on the harmonic balancer, the crankshaft pulley. This way we can rotate that engine around to get this window lined up on this power steering pulley. So you see those windows that are in here. And I need to be able to get a socket through the hole to get to the bolt, which is behind it. Okay. Now a little trick here. If you're working on a car like this and you want to reinstall the belts, a car like this has got all 4 rib belts on there. So all the belts are the same width, the same thickness, and the same number of grooves in them. So if you pull them all off, and they're all pretty similar, you may just want to mark them on there before you take them off. So if I put a little P on here, or PS for power steering, I've got one here for alternator. We're going to change them anyway, but it makes it easier for me to match them up later. So here's what I'm talking about on the belts. If you can see here, all these belts are pretty similar, so I just put some marks on them so when I'm putting this back together, I can match them up to the correct belts that I have without looking the part numbers up. So you can see on here they're all pretty close in size, especially this alternator and air conditioning belt. They're almost identical in size. Now let's take a little peek in here. Now we've got the belts off. We've got a little bit better access so you can see some of these components up close. We've got our alternator there, a water pump, harmonic balancer, crankshaft. You can actually see if you look close there's a little bit of a chip in that pulley. At some point somebody's been in there doing something. And we've got our power steering, and below that is our air conditioning compressor. You look up here, you'll see the front of both camshafts here behind this cover. And then we'll have to get all these plastic covers off in order to access this timing belt on here. Before we can get this timing cover off, there's a camshaft position sensor on here, an optical sensor. This is what the Nissan products used back then. So what we want to do, I'm just going to mark this again. This has been marked from the factory. You can see there's a couple of marks here. There's a little dot on the cover, and then I'm going to put my own little dot on here just because the paint is starting to fade pretty well. And I want to make sure we get this lined up exactly how we took it apart. So I'll put my own marks on there, and then we can remove that. And we'll start with taking out the electrical plug, push that in, release the clip, and there's a little harness cover here fell in my bucket, and then we can go ahead and loosen up the bolts for this sensor. Now I've got some pretty good marks on here to show where the bolt was sitting, because this thing has a little bit of a timing adjustment in it. There's a slotted window on here on the bolt ears. I want to get that right back where it was. So if anything, maybe I'll take another little dab of paint on this one, and just to make sure I got it marked exactly how I want it to sit. Hopefully you can see that. So I've removed the camshaft sensor, the optical sensor here, and I wanted just to point out that the drive lug on here is offset. So this is a common thing that the Japanese do. They make it so you can't put it in wrong unless you force it in. So just really pay attention to that. You can see that this slot in here is really sitting up to the top of this circle versus centered down the middle. And I'll see if I can get in nice and close so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Right? So you can see that slot. It's not directly across the center. There's a fat end and a skinny end. So I just want to make sure we put that back in correctly. And I went ahead and removed the bolts here on the upper timing cover. Let's see if we can get this out of the way. There's your upper timing cover. And again, this is a close-up here of my little mark that I made. Okay, it was already there. I just made my own again, something a little bit skinnier so we get that lined up properly. Next, I'm going to remove the bracket that holds the sensor in place. Take that out. And now we've got some pretty good access to the camshafts. We can see where the marks are on there, and this way we can make sure that we're taking this apart correctly before I pull the balancer off. All right, so I've rotated this engine around one more time. Our timing marks were 180 degrees off. That just means we weren't on compression stroke on number one. If you guys haven't seen my videos on compression test and leak down test, I go into that a little bit more in depth of why the camshaft spins at half the speed of the crankshaft and why we need 2 revolutions of the crankshaft to make 1 revolution of the camshaft. So you can watch my videos there, compression test and leak down test. But in this video here, I'm just going to get into the timing belt. I've lined up our marks here. There's some marks on the cover on the outsides of each side. There's little dots on the pulley that have been painted in the past. And then there's a red mark on the balancer here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to accentuate these marks with my yellow on here, because we've got a nice dot here. And then we've got a nice line here. And I always like to enhance the marks on a car, especially if it's older. It just makes it easier to see instead of trying to guess your way through it with some old marks. Right here you can see that I put a mark, and there's a mark back here that it lines up with, and then over here there's another mark and a line on the cover that lines up with. And then down below here I want to show you the harmonic balancer. Now you can see on there that we've got a bunch of white marks, and we've also got a red mark. Well, our red mark is top dead center, and then our white marks are timing marks, usually about 5 degrees for each of those increments. We would better see that with an advanced timing light, one that has a feature on it with a digital calculation, so we can advance the light and see exactly how many degrees each increment is. You can see you have to get down level with these in order to get a good look at them and see if they're lined up properly. Okay, I'm going to come across now, and then you can see here the marks, how they're lined up when you're level. Okay, so if you're looking at it from the top, you have to be careful. If you come up here and you're trying to line up these marks, it's not easy to do. Okay, but when you come down level, that's when you're really going to see it. You want to get eye height right on your mark and make sure everything's lined up. Now, one of the nice things about Nissans, some of them, they give you marks on the belt. So we're going to line those marks up with the marks on the belt anyway. But I always like to make my own marks before I take something apart. We don't want to have any problems whatsoever with timing issues. So the next step here is to get this harmonic balancer off. We're going to need to use a puller on here. So we've got this little adapter and a pressing rod. I always like to make sure I put a little oil on the threads when I'm using my pullers so they don't get destroyed. It makes the pulling come a little bit easier and helps keep your tool lubricated so that it works at its best. So I'll go ahead and throw this on here. You'll want to make sure you use whatever adapter fits inside the front of the crankshaft so we don't damage it. And then we just need to find the bolts that fit in the front of the pulley. And we can thread that in. All right, and then we're going to need something to tighten this bolt down and pull this pulley off. Probably going to grab a ratcheting wrench. You just want to make sure that's in the middle of the crankshaft. We're just going to go ahead and run this in, see if we can get this balancer to pull right off. There it is. All right, let's get that all out of there. I want to show you that setup here. You can see the harmonic balancer has got to be, these bolts have to be threaded into the 2 holes in the balancer, and then this has got to push on the center of the crankshaft without damaging the threads inside. Now that we've got that out, we can remove the rest of the bolts on the lower timing cover. All right, and there's our lower cover. And you can see it's got some oil buildup in here around the inside of the cover. And that's kind of what we're trying to address here. Not only do we need to do a timing belt, but I want to try to stop this leak if we can. All right, we're going to remove this timing belt retainer. It's a little guide to keep the belt on the pulley properly, not rubbing the balancer. And let me get you a close-up here of these timing belts set up now that everything's apart. So let's get a look in here. All right. I want you to be able to see the timing belt. Okay, check the tension on it. Okay, we've got a couple of pulleys here. This is the tensioner pulley and the idler pulley. This is the crankshaft pulley. And then of course we've got our intake sprocket here. And we've got our exhaust sprocket over here. Okay, and you can see some of that oil buildup now in and around here on this side in this corner. We're going to take a look and see if we can figure out where that's coming from. I'm going to have to remove the belt next, and then we're going to go ahead and remove the pulleys on here. This way we can see what's behind it. I'm going to take my paint marker again. We're going to put some marks now on the crankshaft pulley. This way we can make sure everything goes back together the way we took it apart. This car was running fine, and I probably should mention here, this is something you could normally look up. Now, I don't have that luxury here. Our systems don't have any access to a R34, which is not in our system at all because we're in the US and this car is from Japan. So we're going to wing it a little bit here. We're just going to make some marks. And as I told you before, there are marks already on all the pulleys and everything. Everything is where it belongs compared to other Nissans. And this belt also has marks on the belt as well. They're going to line up to these dots that are already pre-existing on the pulley. So no worries really. I like to do this for my own sake. Just make sure I'm putting it back together exactly how I took it apart. And I really want to show you this belt here up close because you can see how worn it is. This is a good thing we attacked this belt as early as we did. It's cracked pretty badly. It looks like it could break any day. So right here, we've got the crankshaft pulley. I just want you to be able to see those little dots I put. There's already marks there. There's a little notch in the cover right there. And then there's also a dot on the pulley. So I just want to make sure those line up at the same time that these marks line up over here. Okay? Let me see if I can show you better with a mirror. If you can look into my mirror the way I can, you'll be able to see this. Hopefully you can get a little bit of a look in there at the dots through the mirror. So the next thing I want to do here before I take my belt off, I want to loosen up these sprocket bolts on here. So I've got a big bolt on the front of this one, and I've got 4 little ones on here. I'm just going to crack all these loose before I take anything else apart. All right, so here's our camshaft side. And then we got to get this Allen bolt out. All right. And we've got this big one inside. Okay. And just rotated the engine just a little bit. I want to put my marks back where they belong. Everything lines up nice. Now we've got everything lined up where it belongs. I'm going to double check my lower mark here. That looks good. And then we're going to loosen this tensioner up, take the belt off. All right, we're just going to rotate this tensioner now a little bit clockwise, take the tension off the belt. So that tensioner we rotated clockwise, that brought some tension off the belt. Now we can slide the belt off. Okay. Here you have it. So next I want to take these pulleys off completely because we need to access the rear cover on here to see if those front seals are leaking and replace them. Now it's important to note on here, when you're doing a timing belt, timing chain, most of the time, and I want to say all the time, thank you Ford and Mazda for changing the system up, but most of the time your pulleys are going to be keyed with some sort of a woodruff key, roll pin, something to index this on the crankshaft or camshaft the way it comes off. Now if you're dealing with a Ford, you Ford guys already know, but they've got friction rings and there's a whole timing kit set up. You've got to set everything up properly before you take it apart to hold everything in place, put it back together with new friction rings. So this is a different setup. But the majority of cars we're working on, especially these older ones, they should all have some sort of a dowel or keyed area for these pulleys to line up. You can see one right here that lines up into this. You can only put it on one way, hopefully. Let's get this other one off. Remember we pulled the cover off here. There's a little Allen cover because there's oil on the inside. This has variable valve timing. So this sprocket has oil pressure going into it. So we want to make sure we don't lose any seals or anything. Make sure it comes apart nice. Again, we've got, this is keyed only one way. I hope you can see the mark inside here. Okay, so the it only goes on one way. Okay, and not to mention we haven't moved anything. We want our pulley marks to line up the way they were. There's a dowel pin in there already. This is going back together the same way it came apart. Okay, now you can see with the pulleys off, we have access to the rear cover here, the rear timing cover. And we're going to go ahead and pull those bolts out and strip this back the rest of the way, see if we can see those cam seals. If they're leaking, we want to put some new seals in, obviously, and put it back together. Hopefully we've got what we need, because these parts are coming from Japan. Let's remove a couple of these bolts, see what's behind here. A couple more here. All right. We got a couple of hoses stapled to this thing and some silicone. I'm gonna have to pop these off too. Not sure why Nissan decided to put this hose through the cover. Well, we've got to get it off either way. There's one. And use our hose pick a little bit and see if we can work this off here without breaking it. Be careful with these skinny hoses. This is pretty badly deteriorated from the age. We don't want to have to go replacing every hose in this car if we don't need to. Slide this back a little more. Put a little WD-40 in here, right underneath my hose pick. And then I can work this around a little bit. There it goes. All right, so there's our cover. Now, I hope you see on here, we've got a pipe that goes along the back of the cover. You can see all the oil that was leaking in here. It's soaked all in here, okay? And this was what I brought to Roger's attention when we did the inspection on this car, is that it had a pretty significant oil leak behind the timing cover here. So hopefully we can get that resolved for him by putting these seals in. And he's gonna get a new timing belt, some new belts because they were squeaking a while when he bought it. Get them all fixed up. So let's take a look right here. Take a look, you can clearly see the front seals here now. And all the oil that's accumulating down below those camshafts. Okay, so lots of accumulation down there. We're going to get that all resolved and make this thing work nicely. You can see some oil. It's been dripping all the way down to the bottom there, right below where the crankshaft pulley goes. Okay, a little bit wet down there. And you can see right in here, if I come in from the side, you can see it's pretty wet around both of these seals. Okay, right underneath the camshaft is where the camshaft oil seal is. Leaking right at the bottom of there, and the same one here. We're gonna get some new ones in there and get it all cleaned up and make it look nice. So when removing these seals, there's a lot of different tools out there to pull seals. I guess I'm stuck in my old ways. I've always used a small screwdriver like this. Most of the time it's very successful. Every once in a while you've got to try a different method, but usually this works well as long as you don't scratch the camshafts or the crankshaft. If you're getting in there and you're digging on your shafts, whatever they are, the sealing surface, and you scratch it, you're going to have a leak for sure. So it's important you get underneath the seal and never pry off the shafts themselves, especially around the sealing surface. You kind of want to pry away from them. So however you can get in there and work that a little bit, it usually works out well. Now they have some tools out there like these things. You know, they're somewhat successful. Sometimes they're really hard to get in without scratching anything. So if you can pop it in there and use it, that's great. I haven't found them to be all that successful, so I don't really love them. Screwdrivers usually just kind of work the best for me. These are a little bit harder because they're so long. I'm going to try to get in here and see if we can pry away from this. These are really stuck in there. They've been in there a while. See if we can get this other tool in here. All right. So that kind of worked for that one. Let's see if we can get this other one out. I don't know if we'll be as successful. All right, so I finished taking all these seals out. They weren't the easiest to get out. I've got a couple of cam seals and a crankshaft seal. These things are hard as a rock. There's no way these were holding up very well, and that's probably why we had this oil leak coming out of the camshafts on both sides. So now that we've got those out, I've got everything cleaned up pretty well under the hood, got rid of most of that oil mess, just everything's ready to put some seals back in. But before we want to do that, I wanted to show you what this timing belt looks like. So I've got here both timing belts. This is the old one and the new one. Obviously all the ink and stuff is faded off of them. You can see that there's not much on there, but there was a couple of unique things I wanted to show you about this particular timing belt. And one is that it has marks on it already. So on this belt, we've got lines for the camshafts and the crankshaft to line up to the marks on the pulleys, okay? So that helps you put the belt on in the correct orientation. Now, I told you before, I marked everything before I took it apart anyway. In addition to that, there are some alignment marks that you should be able to locate in the repair manual in order to figure out how they line up. So this car's got three ways for us to do that. One, the repair manual is going to show you how everything lines up. Two, the belt's going to line up exactly like it's supposed to with the marks. And then the third thing is I've ensured that even if I didn't have a repair manual or some marks, that I could put it back together by making my own marks on there. And I showed you that earlier in the video. Now, I also wanted to talk about this old timing belt. And I hope I'm going to be able to show this to you on camera, but this belt is pretty badly cracked. So I'm going to try to come in close here. Maybe I can show this to you. I don't know if you'll be able to see here all the cracks that are coming on the back side of this belt. In addition to that, this belt oftentimes will have cracks on the inside where the cogs are. So these cogs will actually crack and rip right off. So I was just having this discussion here with Zach a little bit earlier, and we were talking about how timing belts break. Now, sometimes they can snap in half, but more common than that is that they rip the teeth off of them. All the cogs tear off at the crankshaft, and then the crankshaft is turning, but the camshaft can't turn because there's nothing to drive the belt. The teeth are ripped off it. I've got 3 new seals here. We're going to start installing these. 2 for the camshaft, they're the same part number, and then 1 for the crankshaft down at the bottom. Just going to put a little oil on these things and see if we can drive them in. Looks like we've got that seated pretty flush all the way around. I'm just using a large socket here that fits around the outside of the seal. I should probably mention on here, this is the inside of the seal. And we want to make sure we're hitting on the outside edge of this seal so that we are on the strongest part of the seal. Okay, if we're pushing on the inside, we have a tendency to deform that seal, and then it won't seal properly. You want to be real careful not to roll the lip of your seal. Fold it. It'll get pinched in there sometimes, and then you'll have another problem. All right, I'm just checking to make sure that this seal is sitting flush all the way around. I don't want any high spots or low spots on these. And I don't want to push it in too far. Some of them you can go deeper than flush. You want to be careful not to do that. We got the 2 camshaft seals in. Let's go ahead and put the crankshaft seal in. Once again, put a little oil on your seal. I'll put a dab of oil on my crankshaft sealing surface. And then we'll try to rotate this in. And it's really important that you check these seals as you're putting them in. Make sure you didn't roll the lip on it. It's a lot of work to get back in here later and have to replace the seals if you put one in wrong. That one looks like it's in. I'll take an inspection mirror and just look around the entire seal surface, make sure everything looks like it's in correctly. All right, now we're ready to start putting some things back together. I've also got here with me a new tensioner and idler pulley. Now the tensioner pulley has this little Allen key hole in it, and that allows us to rotate the tensioner. This has a an offset hole in it. This way when we rotate it, it'll actually put some tension on the belt. So there's also a spring that goes on here. It looks like this. So we've got a new spring. This spring is going to apply the tension in the correct amount before we tighten it up. So we've got two ways to do that. One, we've got the Allen to move it. So when we're loosening it, we'll use that Allen tool, and then we'll lock the nut down. This way we have the belt loose so we can pull it off. And then we put it back on. We'll make sure all the slack is on the tensioner side, and we'll let this spring do the tensioning before we tighten it up. This is just an idler. The hole is not offset, and this one is just going to allow the belt to run along the back side of it. I've also got here this rear timing cover. Got it all cleaned up. We're going to be putting this back on. I want to remind you we've got a couple of hoses we have to connect. So we'll go ahead and put those on while we're slipping the cover into place. Not absolutely necessary, but maybe just a little bit easier to do now. And with our hose clamps in place, hoses installed, this will sit nice and flush on the front of the cam carriers. We'll start putting some hardware in there. 2 hours later, just want to make sure that cover sits flush before we run the bolts in. All right, with that in place, we can start putting on some of these other pulleys. We've got here the idler pulley. And our tensioner pulley goes on a stud. Gonna run the tensioner in. Now I've got my idler pulley tightened down. I'm gonna go ahead and make sure my spring is installed correctly on the stud back here. And then I wanna tension it out of the way so that when I put the belt on, I've got plenty of slack in here. So I'm gonna turn this thing down about 12 o'clock or so and then tighten the nut until we get the belt on. That'll hold it in place. Next, I'm going to install the cam sprocket on here. This is for the intake side, and this is the one that has oil pressure that feeds into it. So we want to make sure this surface in here is extremely clean. Let me see if I can get up close and show that to you. You want to make sure that surface is clean before we put it on. And once we do that, I like to put a little oil in it as well. And then we're just going to slide this into place. And like I mentioned when we took it apart, there is a dowel pin that has to go, a locating pin that has to go into the slot on here. So we want to make sure we get that lined up. And I should also mention too, we have a sealing surface around here. So it's good to put a little lubricant on there as well. All right, we're going to slide this in place. Now keep in mind as we slide this into place, our marks should already be lined up. We don't ever want to move the camshafts at all while the timing belt is off. We've got that relationship between pistons moving up and down and valves moving up and down. We don't want to change that at all while we're working on it. So it's really important that when you're putting this in, if you're going to use something to tighten it up, that you don't turn this. It's possible you could open a valve and push it right into a piston that's all the way at top dead center. So I'm just going to put that in loosely for now. Once we get the timing belt on there, we'll actually torque that down with a torque wrench, make sure it's on properly. Next, I'll be installing the camshaft sprocket for the exhaust side. This one also has a dowel pin locating it up at top. Let's put that on. All right, so once again, the exhaust cam sprocket is on loosely. We're just going to put it in there until we get the belt on there, and we'll get ahead and everything torqued up when we're done. All right, next we'll be putting on our crankshaft sprocket and our belt guide here. The belt guide is going to go on first. Make sure you put that. So it's got a little bit of a taper on it. You can also look at the marks from the old belt. You'll see the tooth marks on there. Make sure you put that so it faces the pulley. Okay, and then we're going to put our pulley on. It's got a locating dot on here. I'm actually going to highlight this for us. So I went ahead and put the dot on there. This way we line up our belt, we'll know exactly where that's at. There's a little dimple inside the pulley here. Put that on. Then we're ready to install our new timing belt. Let's see how this goes. This belt is labeled front. Make sure to point that towards the front of the car and see how this all lines up. So I'm starting on the crankshaft here, wrapped it around, and then I'm just going to bring it up to the camshaft on the exhaust side. And the reason I'm starting on this side is because I want to try to end up with all my slack on the tensioner side. It looks like we're lined up there, and then we just kind of have to rotate some things a little bit to get the slack back where I want it. Now, will that slide over? Not yet, huh? All right, we're going to move this tensioner a bit. Hang on. There's my wrench. And I lost my wrench. Losing my mind. See a 14mm wrench anywhere? Yes, there it is. Let me loosen this. Watch your fingers for a second. You can just hold it off to the side a little bit. It's fine. Let me get in here with the nut. Okay. You're gonna have to rotate that back up. Okay. So now we've got our timing belt all on. We've got all our marks lined up. So I made my yellow dots earlier. They line up, they correspond to the marks that are already existing. There's one on the cover, a dimple on the cover, there's a dimple on the pulley, and then there's this white mark on the belt. So I always just like to look at them, make sure they're all lined up. With your mirror, I'm going to come down here to the crankshaft and look. And if you can see in here in the camera, I've got the yellow dots that I made. I put one on the side of the belt that aligned with the white line, and there's also one there on the pulley where the dimple is. So those all lined up on the crankshaft. Then I come over here and I look again at the marks on the exhaust side camshaft. Okay, everything is aligned, and then over here everything's aligned. So everything is timed now. I've taken all the slack out of this side of the belt. Okay, all the slack out of here, slack out of here, slack out of here, and I put all the slack on the tensioner side. That's going to do a couple of things. That allows me the extra room to get the belt on, because this is a tight fit. But it also allows the tensioner spring to do its job. This spring is not strong enough to overcome all the slack all the way around until you rotate this camshaft. So I do have a large set of pliers here that you can use. Just be careful not to scratch anything. You can put this on here, and then you can grab this and just kind of give it a little bit of tug counterclockwise, just to make sure that all the slack is on the tensioner side. That's where we want it. And now that we have that, if you look at this tensioner, you can see if I take some pressure off it, the spring is trying to push back on the belt, okay? And that's where we want it. We want that spring to try to set the tension on here. We don't want it to have to try to pull the belt across and take the slack out of all these. We just want to set the tension. So once you've done that, sometimes I just kind of take the tensioner and I give it a little wiggle like that. And then we're ready to tighten up this bolt. Now, you got to be careful with timing belts. If you make them too tight, they're going to whine and make noise, cause damage to stuff. You make them too loose, they're going to be flopping around, rubbing the cover, and eventually they'll jump teeth. So I like to check the tension everywhere. And obviously, the closer the pulleys are together, the tighter it should be. The further they are apart, a little bit looser. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll rotate that engine around a couple of times just to make sure the tension feels good everywhere. All right, we just want to make sure we're torquing this cam sprocket in place. Now this one could be a little tricky to hold. That's why I said I like to do this with the belt on and tensioned. Okay, because it allows me to hold this other cam. The belt's doing a little bit of work for me. We've got it torqued down. We're going to do the same thing on this exhaust cam. All right, I'm going to torque down these 4 cam bolts. Okay. All right, so next thing we're going to do, we've got the timing belt all on, it's in time. Our tensioner's tight, idler's tight. We've tightened up the camshaft sprocket bolts on both sides. And now we're ready to put another one of these belt guides on. This goes on the outside of the pulley. Just slide that on. That's going to keep the belt from riding off of the sprocket. And then we need to put our lower timing cover on. Where are you, lower timing cover? Oh, over here. So we're ready to put the lower timing cover on now. You can see this has got a bunch of oil on it. That's from our camshaft seal leak. I want to get that cleaned up in here. And you want to take a look and make sure the seals are intact on these, and also make sure all of your dowels here are in the holes. This will stop you from crushing the cover and cracking the bolt holes on the cover. All right, lower cover is going in. Oops. Put that in place. Got a few bolts here. Tighten those up. Now we're ready to reinstall the upper timing cover. This one didn't get a whole lot of oil on. I'm just going to wipe down this couple corners here. Most of it was falling down below this and out the back behind the rear timing cover. I'll get this cleaned up. Same thing as before. You want to make sure that all your dowels are in place. You don't want to crack the cover. Make sure all your seals are in place where they belong. Keep the dust out from the timing belt area as much as possible. And cover's cleaned up so it doesn't look like we still have a mess here. Okay. Now, I did forget one item here. The front of this variable valve timing camshaft sprocket has another little plug that goes on it with a seal. So this is the plug that we took out in order to access the camshaft sprocket bolts. We need to get this back in as well. Make sure our seal's on there and looking good. All right, we're ready to put back on the harmonic balancer. I want to do that first. This way we can rotate that engine around and make sure our timing marks are looking good. No interference in the engine anywhere. So let's go ahead and put this balancer on. Take my puller off. Again, this has got a Woodruff key that goes in, only goes on one way. Let's slide this into place. Now there are some tools here to put the harmonic balancer back on. We needed a harmonic balancer puller to pull it off. There's also an installer tool. Some of them, like this one, they go on fairly easy, just a light tap with a dead blow hammer so you don't break anything. You can just kind of gently tap it in. Now you want to be careful. You don't want to be beating this thing senseless. It's not good for the crankshaft and the thrust bearings that are in there, but a light tap is fine. If you get it in far enough, like I've got it, we can go ahead and use the crankshaft bolt. It'll pull it in the rest of the way. You don't want to use the crankshaft bolt if you don't have it on at least halfway or more, because you don't want to have a damaged thread inside the crankshaft, and you've got a trashed camshaft. The whole engine's got to come apart. So this bolt's gone in quite a good distance now, and I can actually just twist it with my socket on there and rotate this by hand, and it's pulling the crankshaft in just by hand, which is a good sign. It means we're not going to do any damage to the threads on the bolt or the crankshaft, and I'm going to use my little stubby right angle impact gun here to tighten this up a little bit. Then we could use a breaker bar to tighten it up if we need to. All right, you got it up against there? All right, we're gonna go ahead and torque this down. This became a two-man operation. I've got my chain wrench here around the crankshaft pulley. I've got it wrapped with my belt. I cut the belt, the old one, and wrapped it around a couple times so we don't damage the pulley at all. And we're gonna go ahead and see if we can get this thing torqued. All right, we're right there. This is the belt I used. I just cut it. We wrapped it around the pulley several times to try to protect the crankshaft pulley with our chain wrench on there in place. And this way we're able to torque that down with 2 feet. And while I'm here, I just want to rotate this engine around a couple of times, make sure there's no interference anywhere. Make sure everything looks good. rolls smooth. And my second time around here, I'm just going to line my crankshaft mark back up to top dead center. And hopefully our camshafts line up properly the way they're supposed to. All right, now that we've rotated the engine around a couple of times, we made sure there's no interference anywhere, everything feels nice, got good compression in the motor when I crank it around, and our marks are lined back up again. I've got the timing mark on the crankshaft balancer lined up top dead center. Both my cams are lined up great, so I think we're ready to cover this thing up, but first I need to put this bracket back in for the camshaft sensor, the optical sensor that's in there. And now we can finally go back on with our upper timing cover for the front. We got this one cleaned up already, and I'm going to slide this into place. And then we're ready to put our sensor back in place. Keep in mind we marked this one so it lines up properly with the cover so we don't have any timing issues or anything. And then what I do have to do, I'm going to have to rotate this around. I don't know if you remember when we took this apart, I told you that we had to have this go on only in one way because it's offset, and I rotated the motor one turn before we did that, so I'm just going to rotate this around 180 degrees and we'll slide it in. There it is. All right, I'll slide right in there. I'm just going to line up my yellow dots that I made, and then we can put on our 3 bolts here. I'll snug these up. I'm going to put a water pump pulley on here. So if you guys remember when we took this apart, I mentioned here that these belts are all 4-rib belts, and I've got them kind of labeled here so I can match them up one at a time. I'm just going to hang them on where they go in the correct location, and I'm going to match them up here a little bit because they're all so close in size. I've got a 865, an 890, and a 910 in length, so they're all really close. So just, unfortunately, I cut this one belt here to wrap around the crankshaft earlier to tighten that up. So we're going to see what I've got here. These might actually have some numbers on them. Okay, so the 865 here is our power steering belt. And then I've got the 910 is going to be my AC belt. And then this 890 should be for my alternator. That's correct. So let's go ahead and throw some belts on here. So the first on is my alternator belt. That one's got the water pump pulley on. I got to put the fan clutch on before I can tighten it, but I just want to get them all in place and lined up where they go. And then once I've got this radiator back in with the fan clutch, I'll go ahead and get that alternator belt adjusted. The other two here we can actually do now. They won't be affected by the fan clutch at all. All right, so this power steering belt I can tighten here from the top. I'm going to use that special ratchet head I have from Vim again. My Cornwell guy supplied to me. Now with the belt tension adjusted, I'm going to go ahead and tighten my pivot bolt and my slider bolt. You can see here we've got our belt tension here. This is a pretty short run on here, so it should have a decent amount of tension on it so it doesn't slip. You don't want to over tighten, obviously. Okay, this one here I've left loose until we get our fan clutch on, and then the AC belt is on, and I'll get that from underneath. It's just easier to do from the bottom. All right, next I've got to install this radiator, and I'll probably put the fan clutch in right around the same time here.
Sometimes a little bit of a balancing act to try to get all of this in together. Fan clutch. It's easier to get all your fan clutch nuts on now, and then kind of hand tighten them, and then we'll go back and tighten the belt, and then we'll come back one more time with the tight belt, and we should be able to tighten up these fan clutch nuts the rest of the way. I'm just going to hold the pulley here a little and tighten these up by hand. Put the radiator mounting brackets on. And I've also got these top two screws for the fan shroud. And these screw right into the top tank of the radiator. So it's really important you don't over tighten these. Be gentle on them. So now that we've got our alternator belt tight, we've got our sliding bolt and our pivot bolt tight on this, we're going to go ahead and tighten up these nuts here on the fan clutch. Now that the belt is on snug, it'll keep this from turning. With these small 10mm head bolts, we can just go ahead and tighten these up without having to hold much of anything. Should have enough tension on that belt where you can't turn the water pump. Oops. And then one more down the bottom. That's all four of those. And the clutch spins free. Belts are on. We're just going to tighten that AC belt from the bottom, but now we're here, we can put our upper hose on. Coming. Put our upper hose on. A couple of clamps. When I try to put these clamps on right back where they came off, you can see the shape of the clamp on here, where this piece folded up to there, this one went over here. So I just kind of like to put these back in the same spot because the rubber's already depressed on there. So I'll get a nice tight clamp and fit back where it was. All right, we're getting close here. We got a couple covers we can throw on. Put this snorkel back on the air box. And we'll put the pretty engine cover back in place. Let's get underneath the car now. We've got to make sure the petcock's tight on the radiator. We're going to put the lower radiator hose on, and I think we need to tighten up that AC belt as well. Let's do that. Not easy to see right here, is it? Right here. And then we're going to tighten up the AC belt here. It's a good time just to clean up a little extra of the residue that leaked down when we were cleaning everything from up top. We don't want any of this to get on the belts or drip on the ground when we're done. Make sure it looks like we actually did the job. I want to double check this radiator petcock, make sure I tighten it all the way, which I did last time. We don't want to have a leak here at the radiator petcock. All right, the last step here is to bleed and evacuate the cooling system and then refill it. If you guys have watched any of my other videos, you know that I like to use these cooling system evacuators. I've got several different versions of it. This one just happens to be a new one I bought from Matco. My snap-on one has a broken gauge, so while that's waiting for a gauge, I have another one here because I use them daily. So we're just going to put this in the neck of the radiator here. I'm going to shut the valve on this hose. This is the hose that's going to go into the coolant tank. Now I've got a nice clear bottle here so you can watch this process work. And I'm going to put this into the bottom of the coolant reservoir. right here down at the bottom of the bottle. And then I'm going to hook up my air hose. And then we're just going to watch this gauge. We want this gauge to go all the way into the green zone. That means it's pulled a vacuum. We're going to watch the radiator hoses collapse on there. And that's basically going to suck all the air out of the cooling system and leave us with a giant vacuum in there, a giant void of air. Okay, so I'm just going to open this valve. We're going to let it do its thing. You can see how quickly it pulls the vacuum. It doesn't take long at all. We'll let this run here until it pretty much stops, and then we'll give it another minute or so. So it can no longer pull any more vacuum. It's pretty much at its maximum. We'll just let it go a minute or so to get as much air as we can out of the system. What I like to do before I'm done too, because it's a clean hose here, I just want to pull some air into the hose all the way up to here, so we're not bringing a giant pocket of air in once we start to fill it. So what I'll do now is just going to bring a little bit in slowly till we get right to the top where the gauge is at. So you can see it drawing out of the bottle. Got a little bit of air right there. I just want to kind of stop it right there. This way, the first gulp we bring in is not a bunch of air. I'm going to go ahead and let it run its vacuum a little bit longer. Now, if you come in close here, you can see that the upper hose has collapsed on there. So right here, the hose is completely collapsed. We've got a giant vacuum going on in the system, and that's what we want to see. We want that hose to collapse. And we also want this to hold vacuum. So if you look at here on the gauge, we can see that we want this gauge to stay steady. If it starts to bleed back towards the red or gets close to zero, we know we still have a leak somewhere, and we need to address that before we can fill the system. So right now it's holding. As long as it continues to hold for another 30 seconds or so, we should be good to refill. All right, so the last part of this refill process now is just to allow the coolant to get sucked back into the cooling system. So what we're just going to do, I've got my air supply hose turned off. We let it hold vacuum for a while. Now I'm just going to open up the service port for the coolant to go in. And it's going to start to draw the coolant out of the bottle. Now it's important that we watch this bottle. We don't let it suck any air in. We want it to go down. I can see the bottom of the hose is right here. So when I get to that level, I'm going to switch bottles. Okay. So I've got another clear bottle here for you so you can watch. I'm just going to take this one out quickly and put it back in the other one as quick as we can. Trying not to get any air in the system. And then we can continue to our filling process. Okay, now when the gauge gets to zero, it just means there's no more vacuum in the system. We can't draw any more coolant out of the bottle. So we were pretty much right there with about a gallon or so's worth of coolant. And we are done. There's no longer any vacuum in the system. All right, now that we've got the cooling system bled out, we put a little funnel on here. We're going to start it up and let it run in a second. I just wanted to mention here that we need to top up the reservoir. So we'll take a little bit more of this coolant and just make sure our reservoir is full to the max level. We're pretty close. Now, for those of you that don't have the vacuum lift system, you could certainly use a funnel like this one. This works pretty good. It won't remove all the air from the cooling system, but it'll certainly help you bleed some of the air out of it if you leave it on here while it's warming up. So what you can do is you can just find the correct adapter for your car. These little adapters fit inside the neck of the radiator, and then the caps fit where the cap would normally go. So there's got an O-ring on it. So this will seal up against the radiator. You can tighten that cap up, and then you can put this funnel in. It's got a little stopper in here to plug it up.
Usually turn that upside down, and then you can fill this coolant up right here. You could have done it this way. Just the vacuum lift system seems to be more effective, removing all the air. All right, so I think we're all ready to start this up. Let's see if it actually runs. Well, it sounds like it's running pretty good. Now that we've got it running, we'll let it warm up, come up to temperature, make sure the thermostat opens, make sure the upper and lower hose both get hot. You can look in here for some bubbles in your reservoir. If you get any air bubbles out of here, you want to let them stop bubbling. Now, I probably should have mentioned on here also, if you're doing a timing belt job on your car, you might want to see if you should replace the water pump at the same time. Now, there's a general industry recommendation that you replace the water pump with the timing belt, especially if the timing belt is what drives the water pump. So if there are some teeth on the water pump, or it's internal where the timing belt's wrapped around the water pump, then you would probably want to replace the water pump at the same time. If there's a problem with the water pump, it's going to throw your timing belt off, okay? Then you're going to have the same problem as if you didn't do the timing belt at all, that your water pump may be locked up and ripped the teeth off your timing belt, then you bent the valves and did some damage to your engine. So this particular car, the water pump is external, it's separate, although it does wrap behind the timing belt. So if you had to do the water pump later on, you'd have to take the timing belt back apart anyway. So you could go either way. You could say, oh, we should probably just do the water pump with the timing belt. Or you say, well, it's not really driven by the timing belt, so I'm not too worried about it. If it fails, we'll replace it later. Your choice how you do that. I just say the industry usually recommends replacing the water pump with the timing belt because you're already in there and it's a lot of work generally to get in there. I'm gonna go ahead and cap up this system. I'll put this plug in here so we don't make too much of a mess. It won't empty the entire funnel here. Before we get a lot of pressure in the system, I want to take this off. And we'll cap it up. All right, well, that about wraps up everything we've done on the timing belt job here. I hope you learned a couple of things about when to do a timing belt, why to do a timing belt, interference versus non-interference engines, replace the water pump, don't replace the water pump, front seals, all those things. It's all important stuff, especially if you got a car that's got a timing belt system in there and not a chain. So I hope you guys are enjoying this content for this Nissan R34. We've got tons of projects planned for this. Our buddy Roger from QVO Tactical wants us to do a ton of work on this thing, so we've got some other stuff lined up for it. We're going to create some more videos on it. If you enjoy seeing this car and some of the work we're doing on it, make sure you hang in. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell so you get notifications when we create new content every week. Thanks for following along. Check out another video. We got one for you right here, and we'll see you in the next one.